Shanks for setting this up. For the free lunch, I think we should all thank you for that. I would like to present the slogan of our organization.
Just like an alumni group, I think having retirees belong to the alumni office is just the perfect place for it. Everybody will stay in touch with us and stay on the mailing list for certain pay and keep us updated on your contact information, because we really want you to have all the most updated information we can about us, because you are our best ambassadors. And your grandchildren, your neighbors, your friends all have people in the community who might be interested in learning about this. We really appreciate that. Thank you very much. That's very kind.
Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Ian Brindle as our speaker. Normally, the president of BURA would be doing that, but he is the president of BURA. So it falls to me as past president to do the introduction. Now, Ian and I both arrived at Brock in 1968, as did Martin Gibson in the chemistry department, and Ian was one of Martin Gibson's first 4 graduate students. He did MSc in organic chemistry. However, the real achievement of that first year was meeting his wife, Jill. And they are about to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. Anyway, after Ian finished his MSc, he stuck around at Brock as a senior demonstrator. And unlike most senior demonstrators, he was somehow able, among all the mundane duties, to establish his own research program. He managed to retread himself as an analytical chemist with some mentors, including Ursula Franklin at the University of Toronto and Dick Tomlinson at McMaster, and he started doing serious research of his own, to the extent that the department sponsored promoting him from senior demonstrator into the academic stream as assistant professor. And in 1986, I think it was, he became assistant professor in the Department of Chemistry. And he proceeded from strength to strength and became full professor in 1989. That, by the way, apparently is not possible at Brock today. We had a similar case recently that has been put on hold indefinitely, unfortunately. But we did benefit from even getting this non-standard pattern. Later on, he did a term as Dean of the Faculty of Math and Science, and more recently, before his retirement, he became the Vice President Research at Brock. Anyway, Ian has had quite an interesting career here, and not all of you will be aware that within the last 2 weeks, Ian had a heart attack. He's had 2 operations to put stents in, and the fact that he's walking around and talking to us today and didn't have to reschedule means that he's sort of a walking example of the miracles of modern medicine. Having introduced him in this way, I'll just give this title is here, A Prehistory of Brock University. Ian.
So I don't think I'm going to collapse in a heap. I have no intention of doing that. In fact, last Saturday after my operation, actually Sunday the day after my operation, I was raring to go, but they kept me in for another operation, so now I'm doubly raring to go. So everything is good, firing on all cylinders and so on. And I had to make myself fit for this because this is an opportunity to tell you about an idiosyncratic, perhaps, history of Brock University from my perspective, which has a number of diversions, shall we say, into Egyptology, into paper making, and finally into Brock University itself. So I hope you're going to find this suitably entertaining. Actually, before we get too far, you should be aware, for those of you, recognizing that we're all of a certain age. Washrooms are down that way on the right-hand side, so you can easily get to them. Don't worry about that, you'll be fine. Prehistory of Rock University. Everybody knows, it seems, about the Allenburg Women's Association, the Women's Institute. And so we can move forward a little bit. But before that, we need to start looking backwards because, darn, they've been trying to put a university in Niagara since 1789. And it just didn't happen. So Simcoe was the guy who proposed the establishment of a college of the higher sort in 1797. And that was followed by William Lyon Mackenzie, who published an article in the Colonial Advocate that was published in 1824 in Queenston, basically espousing the same kind of idea. And if you look at what he said here, and you can really see how that strikes home. So you're talking about 100 men. Of course, women didn't exist in those days, as we know, available to go to university, and the talent exists locally. They can be educated locally and most likely remain local. Does that sound familiar? This is 1824. You know, this is 200 years ago. And obviously the affordability index, you know, again, very familiar territory being prepared for us in 1824. So, you know, sometimes it's really useful to look at the history, you know, way back. Well, my friend Harry Hunt will tell you that, you know, always look at the old stuff because people were really smart back then. They really understood things. They might not have had science, you know, like I know, I have those in my department, but they were really smart. They really knew about stuff. And so this is 1824, and of course, what happened in the intervening years was that Toronto got it all, right? So Lord Dundas, Strong, all those guys, they set it all up in Toronto. Of course, they were all, you know, the thing about the Niagara University was that it was going to be non-denominational. You know, those Scottish guys didn't believe in denominational things, whereas the Anglican Church had a corner on college education and the education of clergy, which was the origin of the University of Toronto. And so Dundas provided funds, Bishop Strong made sure that it all happened, and so St. Catherine's in Niagara was sort of forgotten until 1957, when the ladies of the Allenburg Women's Institute got together and they thought, after listening to the radio, so Mrs. Editor, listening to the radio, heard that Ontario was going to had introduced 2 new universities, and there were still 2 universities going wanting. So where were they going to be? So the 2 that were identified were Luncheon and Windsor, and so the question was, could the university get established in Niagara? So they put together a proposal. So here they are, looking very much like what they were, which is farmers' wives in Allenburg. Anybody not know where Allenburg is? It's just south of Brock. Not very far. A very rural community, and these, of course, were farmers' wives. And, you know, the Women's Institute, which you may not know, was actually a Canadian invention. It was invented at the end of the 19th century. And if you go to Stony Creek, you can see a sign that says, you know, this is where the Women's Institute got started. Unfortunately, in Canada, the Women's Institute is almost dead, but it exists in New Zealand, in Australia, in the UK. It still has a life and still does useful things. At the time that the Women's Institute was formed, there were things happening. So The Women's Institute was very heavily involved in supporting the war effort during the First and Second World Wars. They were very busy people, and they advocated, among other things, for stop signs, for school meals, for a whole bunch of things. They were a very active bunch of women who felt that they had something to say to the community. And what they wanted to say to the community of Ontario is, let's say, university. But they were, of course, be polite. And so they put it in motion. And so I highlighted in red the parts that I think are relevant today and have that resonance back to 1824. Whereas there is a great shortage of lawyers, doctors, teachers, engineers, etc. in Canada, and whereas parents could send more students to university if they could live at home, therefore be it resolved, we ask the provincial government to favourably consider the placing of a university somewhere in the centre of the aforementioned, which is basically in the middle of the Niagara Peninsula. This was the message that was delivered on February the 6th, 1957, by the women of the Allenburg Women's Institute. This was picked up subsequently by some notable people, including Mel Swart, some of you will know as a long-time union guy and a supporter of workers. And he was a reeve in Thorold, I believe. And so he introduced basically this motion to the council and proposed a few additions like free tuition and so on. It was early sounders of that time, as you can imagine. He would go along to try to get a few extra things for what he believed in. And of course, what he believed in, the socialist guy was, believed in free education for everybody. So that sort of sets the scene. So what I want to do now is to take a complete 180-degree turn away from that and talk a bit about papermaking, which was obviously very important in the Niagara Peninsula. And as we'll see, it had a number of knock-on effects because of this interest in papermaking that brought the character that I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking about, namely Arthur Albert Schwab. So let's think about papermaking, because I bet you never thought we'd be talking about that today, did you? So papermaking, typically in the 19th century, and certainly before, paper was made from rags. So there were rag pickers all over North America, all over Europe, picking rags out that were going to be pounded into fibre to make paper. And by the end of the 18th century, they were running out of rags for paper. And they were going further and further afield. And they were being sourced as far away as the Middle East. So here's an interesting. So when Napoleon owned, who thought that Napoleon was ever into Napoleon opened up Egypt in the French campaign between 1798 and 1801. And this made available for the rag pickers of Egypt a market for their rags. So what? Well, here's so what. Where could you find a lot of rags? They were wrapped around mummies. They were wrapped around mummies, and here you have a photograph from 1875 of a rather dozy street seller here peddling mummies along the side of the road. You know, isn't this astounding? You know, you'd think that people would know better than to do a thing like this. But in the 1880s or so, here they were. And you could get this for a few bucks. You could get yourself your own mummy. And if you wanted, you could buy, as you will see in a moment, you could have a mummy unwrapping. And so you could unwrap mummies and guess what happened to the lining, of course, wasn't you could sell them because they were made of linen. A good source of fiber for making paper. So here is a document. It's the only document that I've been able to find that was actually made from mummy wrappings. And it's a hymn from the end of the 19th century, which says it is actually made of mummy wrappings. So, gives you an idea of just how desperate people were for fiber to make paper. So that's really the point of this. And just as a sideline, for those of you who are familiar with the Innocents Abroad, here's a comment that not only were they good for fiber, but they were good for fuel. And so here is in Innocents Abroad, Twain saying, that the Egyptian railroad used fuel comprised of mummies 3,000 years old, purchased by the ton or by the graveyard for that purpose. Sometimes one hears the profane engineer call out pettishly, "Damn these plebeians, they don't burn with scent. Pass me out a king." So, yes, kings being better wrapped, more flammable customers. Of course, all that came to nothing because here we have a rather doleful-looking character whose name was Charles Fenerty, a native of Nova Scotia, who actually invented the paper-making process from wood pulp, which he developed in the 1840s. He was a poet as well as an inventor. Never made a cent from this, but he did write some rather nice poems, apparently. And so he introduced the idea of turning wood into fiber, or bleaching it. So all of the fundamental things about making paper were developed in 1844 by Charles. So it's in that context that we introduced the need for paper to make newsprint. And newspapers across all of North America were making paper from wood by the end of the 19th century. And so it's into this market that emerged Arthur Albert Schwab, who became ultimately the head of the Ontario Paper Company, and after whom the Rock Tower is named. The interesting thing is about Schwab is that he started off, he's the son of German immigrants into the United States. He was born in Newark, New Jersey in 1895. His father was a bread baker, and his mother was a homemaker, Wilhelmina. He obviously was a bright guy. He was admitted to Princeton University in 1913 to study English. So, interesting. Fellow classmate was F. Scott Fitzgerald. Not that there's been any, when you're digging up stuff, you find out interesting things. And F. Scott Fitzgerald was quite a famous writer. And so there he was, so that there was a magazine called The Tiger, I think it was, and F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote for The Tiger. Arthur Schwab was the managing editor of the journal, so they obviously knew each other. So there was interesting things. He graduated in 1917. 1917 is an interesting year in the United States because that was the year that the United States entered war, the First World War. And so he graduated in June, and in July we find him at artillery school in France. So this is our graduate. He graduated in the top third of his class in Princeton, and somewhere in my records I have the record of his grades. He's an okay student. But he went, as I say, he went to France. So here's a couple of points that I think are interesting. first of all, the motto here, which is the motto of the 1st Division, the U.S. Army, which resonates and resonated throughout Arthur Schmone's life. No question about what this guy believed in. So here is the point at which he is identified by Colonel Robert McCormick, who was the publisher of the Chicago Tribune. So he was, at that point, he wasn't a colonel yet, he was, I think, a captain or whatever it was. And so he's looking out and he sees people, doing stuff as they will, So you're at a meeting and suddenly everybody starts to get really interested in what's going on because they don't want to look in the eye of the guy who's at the front. And this is what he said. He had just saw one pair of eyes looking. What's your name? Second lieutenant. That identified him. And here, there's this wonderful book called Trees to News. It was written by Carl Wakeman in 1953. One of the great sadnesses that I feel, because I spent a long time looking for information about Arthur Schmone. And he quotes, Wakeman quotes Schmone's war diary, which has disappeared. It is impossible to find. I've looked everywhere. I even called Wakeman's daughters to find out whether they had any notion. The two grandsons of Arthur Schmone have no idea where this war diary is. But you can look at this laconic statement here, made by Arthur Schmone as he's walking out with the colonel, what was an agent at that point. The Germans start shelling them, and he notices shell fragments a few feet away from where he is. Super cool, he just doesn't really get very excited about stuff. So it's worth thinking about this. So, the war goes on, and McCormick goes away. He ends up becoming a colonel, and towards the end of the war, Schmone becomes captain. But McCormick doesn't forget Schmone. And on December 31st, 1918, McCormick writes a letter to Schmone offering him a job. And this is the relevant bit. We have a property on the north shore of the Gulf of St. Lawrence that needs a man. So, graduate of Princeton, degree in English, looking after the timber rights on the north shore of the St. Lawrence. What was it that McCormick saw in Arthur Schmone? Obviously, a great deal. If you read this letter, it's interesting because, of course, McCormick, as the owner of the Chicago Tribune, had a very cynical attitude about the peace that was established in 1980. He did not believe that it was going to last. And this is a photocopy of the original document that he sent to Arthur Schwab at the end of the war. So it's distressing to see how clear it was in McCormick's eyes just what was going to happen. So he goes to the North Shore, which, as you will know, because you've all had some Canadian history, that the North Shore was Cartier's description of the land that God gave to Cain. Now, for those of you who are not biblical enough, let me just explain briefly what that means. So, after Cain killed his brother Abel, God said to him, "Get out of here. You are going to this land, and whatever you put in the ground, it won't grow. Forget it. You're wasting your time. This is a terrible place that I'm exiling you to." So that's where Schmone ended up in 1919 with his new wife, Celeste, managing the timber rights on the North Shore. No access to you couldn't get there until May, when the ice broke up on the St. Lawrence. So it was not an easy place to live. And two city folks, remember, they're both from Newark, New Jersey. Both Schwab and his wife Celeste came from New Jersey, Newark, New Jersey, just across the river from New York. So they find themselves here. So here they are in Shelter Bay, which is the location. Again, another tidbit of information. Shelter Bay was originally called Rocky Bay, but McCormick decided that nobody would ever want to come to a place that had a name like Rocky Bay. Let's call it Shelter Bay, and that's what it became. So here they are. This is Captain Schwab, looking behind the fashion, and his lovely wife Celeste. And this is the kind of housing that they lived in when they moved in. The house that they first lived in, as Celeste noted, eventually became a chicken coop. Just to give a sense of how things were. This is the North Shore. There was nothing there. There were no roads, dog sleds, and everything like that was going on. This is 1990. In 10 years, what do we get? We get hydroelectric power. We get new timber resources being exploited, being shipped out on ships, which are owned by the Chicago Tribune, down the St. Lawrence into Port, to the Ontario River. So this is what happened. And in 1930, Arthur Schwab followed the paper and ended up in Florida. As he said, and this is a note. So in the 1950s, Arthur Schwab gave a talk at the New Commons Society, which was an institution that was founded in the 1920s. New Common, for those of you who don't know the history of steam engines, New Common developed the first steam engine in the 17th century. So when they wanted to celebrate achievements in engineering, they gave the name of the organization, the New Common Society. So he gave a talk in New York to the New Common Society, and this is what he said. Colonel McCormick offered me the job of managing the Shelter Bay plant, and I accepted, pleading my inadequacies. I told him I didn't know the difference between the spruce and the balsam. So McCormick agreed that this was a fundamental deficiency, but I had some qualities that might offset this, which obviously he did. When he left Shelter Bay, which became a big coal home, then you had paper-making machines, hydroelectric developments, enormous work. Just a quick sidelight on this. A number of years ago, there was a writer who wrote a book called The Colonel, which is actually a history of Colonel McCormick, in which the author, describes Arthur Schwab as a sort of sniveling, bootlicking nitwit. I was so furious when I read this, because it obviously couldn't be true. This is a guy who built the North Shore, built enormous resources for the Ontario Paper Company, and proceeded to do the same thing when he came to St. Catharines. So, and in a subsequent paragraph, McCormick talks about the strength of character of the kind of guy that Schwab wanted. There'd be no question that this would be a guy that you would give the job to. Whatever the job was, he'd do it, because he went by that motto that I showed you earlier. So, no surprise, when the university group was founded, Founders Fund was established. They were looking around. Who are you going to get to head this up? Well, the chronology I'm not absolutely sure about here, but let's start with a couple of people whose names most of you have never seen. We all know about Mrs. Eggerton, but the person who, for my money, is really important, especially the woman who is very important, is Emma Beers. Emma Beers was a counselor from Stanford, that's not Stanford, Connecticut, that's Stanford, Niagara Falls, and she and another young mother, Naomi Beeman, went around with clipboards, getting signatures to support the establishment of the University of Niagara. It was these statistics that ultimately did the persuading that needed to be done to establish a university in Niagara. So we have these folks collecting this information. Industrial and union leaders, including Lynn Williams, who some of you may remember as the leader of the Steelworkers Union. He ended up being on this founders committee. And so they all lined up in favor of the establishment of the university in the Niagara Peninsula. So here's a delightful written statement that Bill Burgoyne made in 1963. I'll read this out. I would like to know exactly who conned him into taking the job, which was the chair of the Founders Committee, because for my money, they are the unsung heroes of Brock. It's about 15 months, in other words, July 1962, keep that date in mind, since Arthur began his task. He put together a team in short order, and I want to tell you that in this short time, as universities go, that's also something to remember, he and his team have accomplished more, I'm convinced, than could have been done by anyone else as chair. And yeah, so 1962. Before this, there's really not very much. People have gathered information and so on. They give it to Arthur Schmoen, and he basically takes the ball and runs with it. But, what are you going to do? You're going to try to get a university. What's it going to be called? Where's it going to be? What are the important factors in here? I don't know how many names there were, and I don't know how many places there were. But what I've given you is the ones that ended up at the top of this. The location is easy. You have something like 23 communities in Niagara. You probably have 23 sites, each one of them vying for the establishment of the university there. But the short list ended up with Niagara on the Lake, Niagara Falls, with the Q site, which you have now, the Niagara on the Lake site was, for a long time, was thought to be the front runner. The Department of National Defence had a firing range on the shores of Lake Ontario. It's a beautiful location. It ended up being where they put the sewage lagoons. And Niagara Falls, they thought they might be able to take over Oak Hall above the falls. Nice place, nice building. And then there's the Q, with a tiny little farmhouse, the field house, which was built in the 1820s. Name of the university? Anybody's guess? Simcoe, Drop, Southern Ontario, Niagara, and others, of course. Everybody had their favorite. You can quickly, knock off a couple of these. Can you imagine having Simcoe University in St. Catharines? What the hell would you do with Lake Simcoe and Simcoe down western us here? You're not going to get started on that one. Maybe we'll work Southern Ontario, Niagara. Well, you've already had Niagara University on the other side of the Niagara River. That's not going to work. So they came up with Bluff. And the location is interesting because in the documents, you can look. I invite you to go to the Brock resources. They're a wonderful resource to go looking through, and you can read all the minutes and reviews and things like that. But it's pretty clear that Jerry Bull, who was the Lord Mayor of Niagara-on-Lake, had got a bit between his teeth. He was feeling pretty frisky, and he thought that D&D was going to give that site for the university. What he didn't know was that the fix had been put in ahead of time. The fix had been put in because Ivan Buchanan, who was the mayor of St. Catharines at that time, and this came from a conversation I had with Bob Bell, who was a councillor back in the day. So one afternoon, Ivan Buchanan spoke to the councillors. What I've been doing, I need to tell you. I've contacted a real estate man and put options on land across from the sanatorium without council's permission. So he was optioning the land that became Brock University. Why? Because if anybody got wind of a university being built on land, people would speculate, buy up the land and jack up the price. So Councillor Harry Gale responded saying, that's the finest thing we've ever done, which was probably quite illegal, but this is the 1960s, the 20th, so that was it. So once you had all of this, and once you had somebody like Arthur Schmo, then things started to fall very quickly into place. So remember I said the date. So beginning of July, Arthur Schmo becomes the chairman of this committee. On the 12th of July, he's already got a meeting at the Ministry of Education. The minister at that time, of course, was Bill Davis, who was a member. There's a thing that I never got to put this in here because I kept forgetting it. One of the things about Arthur Schmo that is his grandson, Arthur Jr., who currently lives on the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia, said his grandfather had thousands of friends. In 2019, everybody has thousands of friends. You know, Facebook is loaded with them. But in 1962, they had thousands of friends. And they were friends. These were people that Schmo could pick up the phone and call Leslie Frost, who was the former Premier of the province. He could call up Bill Davis. He could call up John Roberts. And they'd answer the phone. And that's the guy that we're talking about. So this committee, which was chaired by the former Premier Leslie Frost, was basically embroiled in the setting up of universities. So one of the comments that Frost noted was that the university would spring from an involved community. So again, we're coming back to the same issue again, that the issues that Shanks has been talking about, here it is again in 1962. It's something that people seem to want very bad. And out of this meeting, and I got this sort of image, because of course Schmo would have gone to Toronto on the probably stayed at the Royal York, and he was a big cigar smoker. So I got this image of him sitting around in a suite of rooms at the Royal York, smoking cigars and drinking Scotch whiskey, and making the deals like Brock University. And so all of this was done. Brock University was about to come into view. And by the following spring, we have the location and we have commitments, including, and no small thing this, because in 1962 they were just building 406. And so one of the things that Frost did was to put a photo leaf, as they from 406 so that it would exit onto the Brock property. So Ontario Hydro abutted, still abuts the property at Brock University. So the provincial government agreed not to sell any of that land except to Brock University so that they could extend the campus. The gas company, the water company, the electrical connections were all brought to the perimeters of the Brock campus at no cost. And the government provided funds for the establishment and equipping of the facilities at Brock University. So here you are in 1960. 1960, no problem. The most salient feature is this thing here, the driving. And those of us of a certain age who grew up when that thing was still operating, we would remember, among other things, that it made quite a trade out of showing soft porn movies. And so if you were driving along St. David's Road, you'd come up off the 406 and suddenly there would be people making out in front of you. I sometimes wonder if it's worthwhile looking back on the statistics for accidents. So diverted by what they could see going on as they were coming along, that they ran into the back of the person in front of them. But there we are. Now, what I wanted to show you, there are some things here that you can still recognize. This little building here, should I say, this little facility here is where the central utilities are ending up being. And here is the place where the designers of the Brock campus wanted to center the campus. This is the small creek that runs, Alfie's Trough is here. So there's a small creek that runs out, as you'll know, if you walk down. And so they saw this as the focus of the university. It never happened that way, but that was their initial thinking. This was where the Brock was going to be. So there we go. That's 1960, and so they now own the land, and so here we are in 1963, and so this is the only extant photograph in the Brock archives, as far as I know, that shows Emma Pierce, who's here, and this is the figure, and this handsome fellow here, of course, is John Robarts, the Premier of the province. So this is the opening of the announcement that Brock University was going to be coming to being. So this was done at a restaurant in Niagara Falls, and for those of you with an interest in culinary issues, this is the menu that they had for that meal. And for those of you who can't see it back there, it's a seafood ravigote, hot consomme, roast prime brindle beef, aubergine, asparagus, peach melba, and coffee. So, you know how to do that. And this is our fish month. So here we are, June 1963. What nobody knew at that point was that Arthur Schwab was fatally ill. A lifetime of smoking cigars had generated cancer. Lung cancer, and so he didn't live much longer. But he started the machinery going. So here we are. Here's the local worthies, just a couple of the beers in there, and this is Neil Swart on your left. Familiar faces from the industries. Everybody was in on it, including McKinnon Industries, which used to exist along Ontario Street, raising funds, and of course, as you can see, here we are, past the $400,000 mark, and at this point, $500,000, which in 1962 was a lot of money. It's a lot of money in this day and age, but I mean, in real terms, it's probably at least 10 times that much if we were trying to equate those things now. There's a tremendous amount of support for Brock University from the community, and so we know, for example, the relationship between the industrial leaders that included both Arthur Schwab, but Wilmot, who ultimately became the head of Molten Enterprises, who was at the time the head of Antis Imperial. These guys were all involved and encouraging and working with the unionized and non-unionized folks in their employ to provide money from pay packets. I know my Jill's stepfather talked about the fact that every payday, when they got money in an envelope back in those days, he'd take out that money and give it for the formation of Brock University. And so here is the first president of the university, James Alexander Gibson, who came to Brock from Carleton. He was the Dean of Arts at Carleton University, Rhodes Scholar, and a member of New College, Oxford, which, if you ask Jill, she'll tell you about our relationship with New College, Oxford. It's kind of weird to discover that we had actually a relationship with the same place that James Gibson attended as an undergraduate when he was a Rhodes Scholar. The university plan, of course, was interesting. Here are this is Bill, who became the vice president, and here's James Gibson with the Brock University plan with phase 1, phase 2, all of that looking very promising. And here is much diminished, as you can see, Arthur Schwab looking rather unwell here, and again pointing out all of these, all of the men, of course, of the coming of the university. Now, I put up the Brock coat of arms here because, and some of you have heard me talk about this before. So we have a coat of arms, which I'm sure some people would much prefer to see this than to see what you see on the top left-hand side, the thumbprint, which has been variously described as a place for illiterates because they had to use thumbprint and they couldn't write. So this is rather grand, featuring, of course, the badger, the beaver, the Canadian, the pipes, and symbols that are related to General Brock's regiment, which is the scallops, which is still used by the Lincoln and Welland regiment. The symbols for Canada and Brock's Ontario. James Gibson admitted that the eagle here that's used in the lower part, he actually stole the fair and square from Barclays Bank. That being the symbol of Barclays Bank. But what I wanted to draw your attention to was this. Certainty. And as I've said to other people, when General Brock was killed at the Battle of Queenston Heights, I'm not sure that he would have said certainty. It might begin with yes. But I think it was certainty. But anyway, we won't talk about that. But back to the matter is that the motto that generations of graduating students had been told was the last gasp of General Brock. And it was because of his last gasp, so to say, that the university decided that that would be its motto. Here is what it actually was. This was, in the 1962-63, there was no college, there was no Canadian College of Heralds. If you wanted a coat of arms, you had to apply to the Royal College of Arms in London. And in that application, the naming committee, or should I say the coat of arms committee, which was a subset of the naming committee, wrote this is verbatim, what they wrote to the College of Arms. The members of the Founders Committee of Brock University, in testimony of his perceptive leadership, unflagging resources, and untiring zeal as chairman of the Founders Committee, in witness whereof the Founders Committee have incorporated in the arms of the university a motto to symbolize and commemorate the devotion and example of their chairman. It cannot be clearer than that. This is all about Arthur Schmone, and it is he who is commemorated by Sergey. And as people who remembered him at the time, all remember, push on, got to get this done, got to move this forward, going back again to the motto of the army he was in 1917. So, again, some of you have seen this is the first faculty. This is the first faculty photograph. And so who do we have here? Well, we have, I don't remember all the names, but James Gibson, those of you who remember, Michael Wonansky, yes, those are the only people who hung around, as it were. This is Dr. Hart, who was a physicist, who after 1 year at Brock said, Lakehead has need of me. And he left the university. And oh, by the way, this is one of the things. There was always this desire somewhere in somebody's head. Never came to anything at the time. Still hasn't come to anything. There was a desire to have some form of engineering going on at Brock University. And this is Ernest Goldsmith, who was an engineer from South Africa, who he was originally called Goldschmidt. He graduated from University of Berlin. I can't remember which one it was. But being a Jew, of course, he was not very popular, and so he left in the 1930s. The engineering never happened, and he became a registrar.
Could I just mention the disappearance of the faculty member you pointed to, Lakehead had need of us. His departure was the cause of the generation of the Brock University Faculty Association, because John Reed in the math department said, I've invited people to come and join us here on the basis of his presence, and he's buggered off. Well, we can't have this happening, so we have to have an organization that will protect us.
Thank you for that. Always useful to have Ian Shaw. For those of you who have not met Ian Shaw, by the way, he's a Johnny come lately. He only arrived in 1965. Into the English department, under Michael Wonansky. So, an interesting crew, and of course, as you know, Brock is what it is now, a rather different looking location. So, this is the first campus, of course, before the this is so-called language campus, before the days of the current campus, and of course, it no longer exists. It's now a subdivision because of there. But again, same people, Zoom and James Gibson. So here is again the plan from this is the phase 1 plan. So we have the tower here, and the parking lot here, and so and here's the sanatorium as it was. You can see they've embellished this location, which was seen to be the important part of the university that everybody's forgotten about now. But just a few reminiscences of what was happening in 1964-65 as they gradually built what we now call the tower. And in 1965, Frank, we're still there. And you can see all of the things are coming to pass. So there's a place here where things can be organized, and the tower is going up. So that's what we have in 1965. Now, interestingly, the campus plan developed as well as a book on the campus plan, which was published in I think '65, and along with it came a model which sat for years in the faculty club on the 13th floor of the tower, which is a kind of monument. I'm not quite sure whether it's to hubris or what, but this was what the university was going to be like. This was, I think this was Arthur Schwab's idea of what the campus should look like, because there would be a faculty of engineering, a faculty of architecture, a faculty of law, a faculty of medicine. All of these things were in the plan that never actually happened. It got completely changed. A number of people have probably N+1 numbers of opinions about what actually happened, but never came to be. Budgets are usually a good target for that kind of explanation. But this was the image. As you see, the tower is there. The rest of it doesn't look like that at all. Just a photograph here, just to show you that in the late 60s, early 70s, Brock still wanted to be a university with pranks by undergraduate students. So the appearance of the Volkswagen in the lecture theatre in the Glenbridge campus was hijinks by the undergraduate students. And of course, in 1971, the only time that Brock has appeared in Time magazine was when Jan Erasmus took a group of students up to Baffin Island, northern Baffin Island, to have a graduation. Well, they didn't go to have a graduation. They went on a field camp because Jan Erasmus was a quaternary geologist, very interested in post-glacial developments, and so because they were going to be up there in June, and some of the students were in a graduating class, they took all of the regalia and paraphernalia to graduate those students. So they were graduated just by the sea ice in Von Linden. So this is by Long Island here on the north, and so we have the RCMP, the local Catholic priest, officiating at this event. That was quite a celebrated thing for 1971. So this is there's probably a more recent photograph of Brock University. At last, the drive-in movie theatre has disappeared, but not quite completely. You see this thing here? This thing here? This is the last vestige. Why is that all curved? Because it used to be the end of the drive-in theatre. That's why. So there you have it. That's my version of the short history. Sure. By the way, Thank you.
I have a question, but it has, I'm not sure if it's on this topic. With all the developments in Niagara, with the Toronto influx, what's the plans for Brock and into the future, whether it's enrollment or anything else, because it's going to climb. The influx is coming into Niagara.
Well, you know, the great thing about being retired is you don't care. You heard a little bit from Pam Shanks a little earlier about you know, her view of things, and you heard also from Greg Finn about the plan. So Brock has grown. I mean, when I was there, when Jill was there, probably had less than 1,000 students, and so now we've got over 20,000. So things have changed over all recognition, and you know, depending on where you put your eyes, as they say in Sesame Street, you know, you will have a different perspective on where things are going.
It's not just retired people coming into Niagara area. Those retired people are settling here, but they're also bringing their grown children, because they're seeing that the parents have a great place in real estate here where they can sell in Toronto and come here. So the children are coming here, the grown children, bringing their children, because those grown children know that they can commute to Toronto in a lot easier way. So I'd say in about 5-10 years, there might be an influx in enrollment, possibly, hopefully.
Well, we'll see. You know, I think that obviously the administration is developing a number of things. You know, I've not been in administration since 2015, so we've got a new president and new administrative structures. So I have no idea what the plan is. We know what the strategic mandate is, and we know what it is that's being proposed, and you know, and a lot of it, and I think I can say this because I'm not beholden to anybody, sounds like can be. I have no idea. No idea.
Any further comments?
What?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Do you want to know why Jim Gibson was chosen as the first president? What was the connection with Carlton?
No. You know, it was all kept under wraps. And there was no, you know, if you go through the archive, you really can't find very much. Because I suspect that the records were destroyed. So we don't know. You know, why James Gibson? Because, you know, I mean, James Gibson was, this is Ian Brindle talking, he would not have been my choice. Because in my opinion, he was a rather stuffy, unimaginative man. Not the kind of person, you know, I sometimes think of Schwab as being rolling in this world, because I think that Gibson was not what he was, not what Schwab was looking for. That's my side.
I might have something to contribute to that. James Gibson went to Victoria High School with my aunt, and I was talking with her about that at one point, and she said, "Oh yes, we all went to high school. There was all of us, and then there was James, and that he was outstanding, distinguished from population of very talented people like that." So, and his career, you know, his role with the UN, his government responsibilities, and his Rhodes Scholarship, I think, in a way, the university was probably looking for a scholar of distinction, and he was available. I share your opinion that he may not have been the kindest dynamic leader they needed, but he did have a very respectable profile.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I think it was impeccable.
And being first president of any new institution must have been quite exhausting.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Anyway, thanks very much for coming and talking to us, Ian. And I don't remember who it was who said, nostalgia isn't what it used to be. But definitely nostalgia, Matt, you have revived our nostalgia. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Normally at this point somebody gets involved with an honorarium to our guest speaker, but Ian has chosen to give it back to BURA.
Oh.